Hey folks, happy Thursday. Welcome back for another live stream. We're starting just a little differently today. I've got a couple of guests in the audience. So as only brothers can, Dave is razzing his brother Ted. So Dave lives pretty close to my shop, and you
I live out in Richmond, yes.
And you're not a woodworker.
Not like he is. Yes.
But Dave's brother down in Des Moines, which is about 5 hours from here, is a woodworker and is jealous, I guess, for lack of a better word, that Dave lives within a few miles of my shop. So Dave is here to blow raspberries at Ted.
Absolutely. So Elliot and I are here to kind of rub it in a little bit.
Yeah. So
right.
Give Ted. Is that not
be your
great uncle Ted? Yeah. So say hi, Elliot, to your great uncle Ted.
Say hi, Ted.
Hi.
And what else do you want to do to make Ted jealous before you go?
I've got a picture with you, so I'm sure that'll do it. I can carry this through a lot of family get-togethers. So
all right,
appreciate it.
Well, thanks for swinging in.
Thank you so much,
you, Elliot.
Appreciate your time.
Have a good afternoon.
Take care.
Okay, so first off, a little apology for a week ago today. Where were you a week ago today? I think a bunch of us were here and things just got a little kerflooey. So we are unkerfluiated today. And the good news is we've got a lot of questions because we have some overflow from last week. So of course, one of the things I always want to do is thank Total Boat. I'm in a little different spot here today. Thank Total Boat for sponsoring this and keeping it free for you folks. The other thing you may just notice is that my desk is kind of funky today. My desk is a paddleboard that I'm working on. This is a really fun project. It's actually a paddleboard kit. The company that makes the kit is Jarvis Boards, just like it sounds like Jarvis, Jarvis Boards. So I'll show you this one so you get a better feel for what's going on here. The kit aspect is that I got from Jarvis these internal components. These were all laser cut. He's got a number of different boards available, 5 or 6, 7 or 8. So this one was 11'4". It's a touring board, so a little wider. He's got one that's sleeker, which probably means I would have to have better balance. And then the other thing that's cool about it is if you don't like what he's got, he'll custom design and laser cut forms for whatever you want to do. So it comes in a box that's like this big. And then you put the forms together. And then like making a cedar strip canoe, I'm gluing these strips on top. And this one is further along. So one of the things that's fun about it from a woodworking perspective is working with the different materials and getting some contrast going here. So it's primarily Western cedar, but there's some mahogany, bloodwood, there's a maple stripe out here on the edge. And this is the bottom. This is going to get flipped over, and then the same thing happens to the top when it's all done. I've got curly maple I'm going to put into the top. So when the whole thing is complete, it gets fiberglassed. And when it's wet with epoxy, it's gonna, it's already pretty cool looking with the color contrast. But when that epoxy hits and leaves it wet looking, it's gonna be really amazing. And the epoxy is part of what makes it a forgiving process. You don't have to build a watertight integral, or what's the right way? A boat with watertight integrity, because you're gonna cover the whole thing with epoxy and fiberglass mat when it's done. That's what's going to make it waterproof. And a question I've got about 11 billion times is, isn't it going to weigh a ton? This will weigh 40 pounds when it's done. Wood, epoxy, the whole deal. So not that heavy. So it's crazy cool. And I'm shooting to have it done before the water turns hard, meaning before it's freezing. So okay, so let's see where we were going into this last week. All right, here we go. Larry asks, I'd like to have your recommendations on what finish to put on a shop floor. Plain concrete, epoxy, or other finish. I'm building a new garage shop. Boy, what a great question. And this is going to be, I might have to default to my I'm not sure answer for this. Because one of the things, like, I like the epoxy idea, but I don't know much about it. And you want to make sure that, especially once you start making sawdust, you haven't created a floor that's slippery. My guess is with these epoxy floors, you can probably choose different types of coatings to help prevent that. Because I know they commonly use them in garages and, you know, car shops and that kind of stuff. I have worked in a lot of commercial cabinet shops that just have a pure concrete floor. This one is concrete with asphalt tile. The asphalt tile now has a lot of stains in it just from 12 years of me doing woodworking in here. So I would do a little more asking around than just ask me. But I like the epoxy floor idea. I can tell you, we did this, Krista and I did this in a basement bedroom and just got the two-part epoxy from a home center. And it's a really cool technology. You mix it up, and then we wanted to end up with kind of a stippled look to the floor. So you poured kind of an off-white in this side of the paint tray and a beigeish color in this side, and then the roller has two parts to it. So when you put the roller in there, this roller becomes brown, this one becomes ivory, and then when you roll, you're creating a pattern as you roll the floor. It was really, really easy to do. The floor looks great. In that case, that's a bedroom. It's pretty slick. Like, I wouldn't want sawdust on that because I think it would be too slippery. But again, there's probably stuff that can be added to epoxy to take some of the ice rink out of it. I'd do a little more exploration on that. James says, I'm trying to figure out how to clamp an angled piece of wood to a square piece of wood. Is this the correct place to be asking this type of question? Yes. When you do this, a lot of times a clamp call is what you need. So let me get a visual aid. And see if I can make this more clear. And a dry erase. So an angle piece to a square piece. Let's start with trying to get this so it doesn't glare like crazy. And unfortunately, my last drawing is not cleaning off of there very well. So if this is straight, and then you've got a piece, you've got a dry erase that's dead. A piece with an angle on it. So, especially if that angle is real steep, when the clamp pad is on there, it's going to want to skid off. So, if you had a piece with this same angle on it, then that's complementary, right? Or supplementary, I can never remember. But if I had another piece with that same angle that's still square over here, now my clamp could go like this. And when you tighten this, you can clamp these together. The key here is a little bit of double-faced tape, a little bit of hot glue. What we want here is a temporary connection so that we can get these apart later. And even if this cut was really steep, like 45 degrees, I'd be doing the same thing. So I do this kind of thing all the time. When I'm making waterfall live edge tables, we need to put a clamp across, kind of out of white space here. On a waterfall table, you end up with a top and a leg and a 45-degree cut. That's the top, that's the leg. If you just clamp across here, you can't really do it effectively. So you save this piece that got cut out, and then when you put the caul on here, it looks kind of like that. Now I can clamp from here to here and draw that close. And same, hot glue or double face tape, hot glue or double face tape to temporarily hold that caul on, and then you'll be good to go. Okay. Mike says, an ad for a Freud 10-inch saw blade included a blade for plywood and melamine, another thin kerf for double-sided laminate and melamine, another standard kerf for double-sided laminate and melamine, and another for single-sided laminate and melamine. This is a lot of blade choices. What is really needed? So the answer is yes, because it depends. So I think what's going on here is if you're cutting plywood and melamine and you're really only concerned about the top face, a blade that has a 10-inch blade with a high tooth count and probably an alternate top bevel tooth pattern is going to serve you. The rake, which is the angle, or also called the hook angle of the teeth, could be a little aggressive, maybe 5 degrees forward, where on a ripping blade, it's way aggressive, 10 or 15 degrees forward. If you have double-sided stuff and you're trying to protect both faces from being chipped out, then a lot of times it's mostly affected by the hook or the rake, and we'd have a 0 or even a negative hook, and then maybe a triple chip grind instead of an alternate top bevel. And what all of that geometry is bringing to the table or table saw is to be able to get a good cut top and bottom. The part of what's going to change between the two when we go, probably the same tooth count on both of those blades, but when we go to a negative hook instead of a positive hook, it's a slower cut. So if the next question is, could I just use the double-sided surface blade, the double-sided laminate blade on all my cuts, even plywood and melamine? Yes. But everything is going to happen you're going to cut a little more slowly. Could I use the more aggressive tooth, 5-degree hook, alternate top bevel on everything? Yes, but you're probably going to have a little bit more chipping on the bottom of the cut. So it is, like a lot of things, the right tool for the job. Having these specialized blades, if that's critically important to you, to have two good faces, it's going to make a difference. And then difference between thin kerf and full kerf is really going to come down to your saw. My main saw is a 3-horse cabinet style saw. I don't worry about putting a thin kerf blade on there unless I'm trying to save material. So like ripping this cedar would be a great example. This saw would easily handle cutting 1.5-inch thick cedar with a standard kerf blade. But because I'm trying to rip 1/4-inch thick strips out of a 2x6, I went to a thin kerf blade, which gives me more pieces. So that's the trade-off there is yield more so than power. So Steve asked, why the 5-gallon bucket for legs? So it's a great question, and I actually stole that idea from the kit company. The reason I did it, so let me see if I can move this a little and not lose it. It'd be a shame if it fell on the floor. put this frame together, to put that frame, I was just seeing if you can see it still. To put that frame together, we need a 12-foot long surface to put it on. So under all of this is a plywood box that I built that's commonly called a strong back. So the plywood box is disposable. When I'm done with this, I'm not going to need it anymore. So all of those frame pieces are hot glued. It's just a temporary thing. They're hot glued to the strong back. The next step on that is I need to be able to have this set up so I can work at it. And I needed something for the strong back to go on. So I stewed on this a lot. We're doing this for a video, and I'm trying to make it accessible for you folks. Like, when you do this at home, how are you going to do this? So one thing I looked at is, what if I just put the strong back on a pair of sawhorses, and then I don't have to do this, and then I have to do this. One thing with that is, if the sawhorses are going this way, then you're going around this thing 11 billion times. Putting the strips on, planing, sanding, fiberglassing, sanding, more epoxy. So I figured having the sawhorses go this way, I'm gonna walk into those things 400 times, and I don't want to do that. Alternatively, could the sawhorses go this way? Yes, that would be better. But then the legs are still coming this way. So this idea of put this vertical column in a 5-gallon bucket, it worked out really well. And this is the project of the day in my shop, but I'm still doing other stuff in here. So if I need to move this, I can still do this. So that one bucket is probably, I don't know, 60 pounds of concrete. So if I need to get this slid around, which I've done 100 times, I can still move that system to a new spot. So it just seemed in the end, it's a one-time deal. When I'm done with the paddle boards, I don't need that bucket anymore. But it was a good way to solve the problem of how do I keep this stable while I'm doing this project. And Steve asks, what Titebond product would compare to Loctite epoxy? Well, they don't, Titebond does not make an epoxy. So epoxy is epoxy. It's got its own working characteristics. Outside of their wood glue arena, Titebond 1 or original 2 and 3, thick and quick, hide glue, the stuff that we would normally use in a woodworking shop. I'm not super versed in their construction side. So is there a caulk tube of something similar to that? I don't know. I can tell you, let me see where it is. A product I'm using on this project is crazy cool. Show and tell. Hang on a second. Coming back. So it's not Titebond, but it's very cool. This stuff. So this is called Fixo, regular caulk gun. When you use it, this comes off and a specialized tip gets put on here. In here right now, there's kind of an upper and lower section, and one of those is resin and one of those is hardener. The tip has a screw thread in it, a mixer. When you squeeze the handle on the caulk gun and you force it through that, it's two separate components of epoxy right now. It comes out the tip as epoxy that's going to cure. So on these forms, see where you can see. On the Featherboard project, every inside corner has a fillet of Fixo to support it. It basically acts as a web, and of course it comes out soft. It comes out about the consistency of 100% silicone caulk. Once it cures, which is overnight, now it's hard, and it's creating a fillet, a web, on each of these inside corners to help hold that frame together. So this is Fixo is epoxy. As far as I know, Titebond doesn't have any similar products. Steve says, when making a rip cut, can you put a featherboard on too tight? I've noticed at the end of a cut that it seems to kick out the piece away from the fence at the far end, or it may just be my bad technique. So you got to be careful with a featherboard. You only want to have the featherboard preceding the blade. So, if I'm facing my table saw and the saw blade is here, the featherboard has to be in front of it, only putting pressure on the fence, not putting pressure next to the blade, not putting pressure past the blade. And the reason for that is we don't want to pinch, you can't pinch that offcut, you can't allow the featherboard to pinch the offcut piece against the blade, or you could get a kickback. So I don't know from your question if that's part of the problem, is positioning of the featherboard. Is it possible to have it too tight? Yes. Because the other thing we don't want to do is like have so much pressure on there that it's then difficult to feed. So when I do classes in here, I find this a lot. Like people have a tendency to overcompensate with the featherboard, putting a lot of pressure on, and then when they go to feed their material, it's really hard to push. You want to know when you're pushing, you want to feel the resistance of the blade, the little bit of cut resistance, but you also want to know if there's too much resistance. In other words, did the blade get dull? Are you using the wrong blade? Are you trying to rip with a crosscut blade? Anything like that. So you don't want so much pressure from the featherboard that you're losing your contact of understanding what the board and the blade are doing, the material you're cutting. So the short answer, which I'm not good at giving, is yes, it's possible to put on too much pressure. Whether that or its position is causing the board to kick out, I don't know. Just make sure that you're positioning that featherboard correctly so it's never, it doesn't go past the front of the saw blade. Lane asks, what's the best way to repair water damaged painted cabinets? It depends a lot on what they are. Like water damaged particle board tends to fall apart, and you probably got to just replace the cabinet. And are we talking about, because you mentioned painted, this is then that paint is ruined, the cabinet is ruined. The good news is if they're paint grade and the cabinet is primarily sound, you could pick out or sand out the bad spots. Like if it's water damage to the point where plywood has started to fall apart, you could remove that, fill that with something even like Bondo, auto body filler, and then go back and paint over the surface. You just got to evaluate at what point is it worth that messing around, and is the end result going to look okay versus replacing the cabinet. But it depends on if you're still on, Lane, and you could define a little better what you mean by water damage. Is it the paint is damaged? Is it delamination of a plywood? Is it particle board or MDF swelled up like a sponge because it got wet? Exactly what it is you're trying to make happen. Lawrence asks, I'm working on a bookcase for a friend constructed of 3/4 maple veneer. He wants it painted with the paint used on his current case goods provided by him, good quality Benjamin Moore water-based glass. After the first coat, one piece has several bubbles in the veneer. It was a very light coat, brushed on. Frustrating. I've heard you can insert glue in the bubble with a syringe and clamp it with gauze. Have you ever done this? I have. I feel like what you're potentially fighting here, I'm reading this again, 3/4 maple veneer. Maple veneer plywood? Because like if something was shot veneered and you fasten the veneer with standard yellow glue and then you put latex paint over the top, it's possible that moisture from the paint is allowing the glue to let go. You know, again, not like a type on 2, type on 3 or water resistant, waterproof. Standard original type on regular woodworking glue does not have water resistance. So the moisture from the paint may have gotten into the glue. In addition, it's affecting the maple veneer, like water does to wood, and making it swell and bubble. So to go back to your question, that you can re-glue it. What you might be fighting is, and it's good that it's paint grade because you can get past this. If it's swelled and bubbled, now you've got a bubble that's like bigger than the surface you're trying to push it back into because the wood swelled up. So if you slit it with a razor, utility knife, then can you push it back down? If yes, you could put glue underneath, put a caul over the top, put wax paper, then a caul over the top, so you don't glue the caul to the project, and see how that goes. It's possible you got to do it with not just one slit, because that like blister of wood is now bigger than the area you're trying to push it back into. If that's the case, you maybe got to make a couple slits to provide clearance, then push it back down. If you got to do a couple slits, you're probably going to have to go back then with a little wood dough to fill in any void. You know, if the slits are farther apart than the pushed down blister can cover, you maybe have to go back in there with some wood dough and fill in that little valley before you go back to paint. So yes, it can work. It's going to be fussy to get it right under the paint, but it can be done. When laminating, when laminating strips and cutting the curve, like the paddleboard, I've had edges flake off at the junctions between strips where the strip narrows to a point. Is there a way to avoid this? I'm trying to visualize it. Laminating strips and cutting the curve. So what's going to happen, if this is what Featherboard is describing, is like here, the paddleboard form is under here, and I still have to trim off this excess and bring this cut this way. So that is, I've had edges flake off at the junctions between strips where it narrows to a point. So in doing what I've done so far, so up to this point, all of these strips were running wild out here someplace. I used a pole saw and did a preliminary cut to get to this point. So up to now, where this strip terminates in a really sharp point, it's glued to this. There's a seam between this one, and it's glued rigidly to the adjacent one. So I think the answer to your question is when you turn the clock back, you have to make sure at this point, this is like a big cutting board. This is one big wide board because they're edge glued, and back here, additionally, they're all glued down to the form. You can see over here. Because these are edge glued together, when I come along with a hand plane and a little bit to finish this curve, they should plane just fine. I'm jinxing myself because of the way they're each glued to each other. So that is supporting this, that's supporting this, that's supporting this, and it should be fine. So I think it's back to kind of on the preparation side of putting those strips down to make sure you've got, just to make sure you've got good glue coverage in there and it's solid. Lawrence says, yes, it was maple veneer plywood, and I'll try your technique. So yeah, see how that goes. And the good news is because you're paint grade, that will cover a myriad of sins. Okay. Scrolling. want to make sure I didn't miss something. So unfortunately, somebody, or Katie, can we get the questions from last week? So I'm seeing a question from last week, May 9th at 4:26. I know there were questions before that, but I'm not currently seeing those.
Can you not load earlier questions? If not, I can repost them.
I hate to make you do that. Yeah, I typically see the message that says load earlier. Is that at the top of the chat roll usually?
Mm-hmm. How far back can you go?
It's 4:26, May 9th. Anthony.
Okay.
I know there were some in there about hand planes and stuff
Mm-hmm.
last week.
I'll start putting them in.
All right, cool, thanks. Robert says, I'm interested in getting started with hand planes. Okay, so this is one Katie's bringing forward from last week, which is actually, Robert, I think you asked this a month before when Rob was here. And this is one of the ones I wanted to make sure we got to, because I am not your huckleberry for this. Rob was your huckleberry for this. So I hate to do this to you, Robert, but what you need to do is go back to what month are we in? May. So in April, when Rob Johnstone was here, you had this question, and he did a really good job answering it. It was fun. Rob, as you are probably aware, is the former managing editor-in-chief of Woodworker's Journal magazine. We had him in the shop here for a bunch of video that we shot, and then we had him on the live stream. He's a great hand tool guy. So when you asked this question in April, he had an answer for it. So scrub through the April live stream and you'll get that straightened out. Doug says, I started working on a cutting board and would like to incorporate thin strips, 1/4 inch, even thinner. Any tips for finishing the glue sides with a planer or router table setup? Oh, I got you. So you're ripping the strips and you want to make sure you got a good glue surface. So the key to that on thin stuff is the easiest way to do it is use something like melamine or MDF as a base piece, and then use double face tape to fasten the thin strips to the base piece. And if you've got a 12-inch wide planer, you could have 11.5-inch wide MDF, and then double face tape strip after strip after strip after strip to the MDF, send it through that way, loosen them from the tape, flip them over, do it again. So the reason this is a big deal, if you've not tried this on a planer, when you go to plane really thin material, you're under an infeed roller, and then that first end enters the planer knife, the planer head, and a lot of times you'll hear horrible sounds because it's so thin, it doesn't just cut, it lifts into the planer head. And you can tear up thin material in a heartbeat. Ask me how I know. And it's just the reason it doesn't happen on 1/2 or 3/4 inch stock is that piece is robust enough, it's stiff enough that when the planer contacts it, it can just keep moving forward from the roller pressure, from the roller feed. But with thin stuff, you'll hear it chatter and start to vibrate and then get lifted into that head, and then it just gets chewed up. But yeah, if you temporarily fasten them onto a backer board, that'll let you get away with it. And Robert asks, anybody have a resource for composite dimensional lumber? I've seen patio furniture made from such materials, but I can't find it other than decking material. So when I first started reading the question, I was going to say home center. But yeah, they're going to have typically what we call 5/4 by 5.5 decking. Trex would be a brand name example of that, but not 2x4s and 2x6s. So that's one. Yeah, I don't know. I think Google would be your friend on that. Try to, Google just what you're doing here, dimensional composite lumber, and see what you get. Rob says, I need to cut 1/4 inch wide slices from a 1 1/4 inch dowel rod. What's the safest way to do that so the slices don't go flying? So you want to rip it or you want to cross cut it? So I'm going to assume you're like cutting cookies. You want to end up with 1/4 inch by 1 1/4 inch cookies. A bandsaw would be a great way to do that. Give you really good control. You could have the dowel resting in a V-block. Then you could use a miter gauge, zip, move over, zip, move over. That being said, it's not going to give you the best possible cut quality. If you want to do it on a table saw so that you get better cut quality, same, I would cradle it, use a miter gauge, use a thin kerf, fine tooth blade, and then either install a zero clearance insert in your table, or a real simple way to make a zero clearance insert is to just use masking tape alongside your saw blade. So where I'm going with that is that when you cut these thin cookies off and they're laying there on the saw table, they're probably going to have a tendency to just fall between the blade and the edge of the insert, and get caught, maybe end up in your saw cabinet. So if you seal that off with masking tape, that's going to not allow that to happen. Another thing, I got to think about this for a second. I've seen people, I got to visualize this, like if you made a little sled for your table saw on which to do this, and that dowel is up on a stand, so it's up above the platform of the sled. Then on the offcut side, on the other side of the table saw blade, I've seen people put like a ramp there, so that once you make this cut, the piece isn't going to just fall straight down and hover there and give the blade a chance to catch it. The ramp below it is going to force it to fall away from the blade. And then you can back up, make another cut, and it'll fall away. Back up, make another cut. So that would be a way, anything that would deflect that offcut piece away from the blade would help a lot. Harry asks, what kind of solution do you have to use, to wet a Shapston stone? I probably cannot use soapy water. I don't know, because I don't know what that is. What kind of wood would you recommend to start out with to learn to do dovetails? I've got a Porter cable liming jig, a lot of accessories. Poplar is a really good wood to practice stuff on. There's a couple attributes to it. I'm just grabbing a piece, I think. Maybe not. There's one. I don't know that. So there's a piece of poplar. The downside to it, it's not real pretty. It's got some green tints to it. Sometimes it's got purple stripes, but it's a hardwood. It's deciduous. Pretty tight grain. It's more of like a secondary behind the scenes kind of wood. So you might make drawer boxes out of this, but you're not going to make an entire project out of this unless it's paint grade, because it's not that pretty. So it's inexpensive relative to other, the other usual suspects of North American hardwoods: walnut, maple, cherry. Poplar is quite a bit less expensive. It comes wide. Like I've had poplar in here that's 3/4 by 12, even bigger. So the benefit to that is if you want to practice your dovetails in 10-inch wide boards, you can probably just cut them out of a board and not have to do a glue up. So I recommend this to people all the time for joinery, for practicing on the lathe. It's a really good turning wood, just to practice your shearing and scraping. So poplar is a great choice for that, to get started on any of those. Steve asks, if you were turning a sphere on your lathe, would you use a jig? And if so, what one? So I've not done this, but I've seen it done. And the answer is, yeah, use a jig. And I think a lot of turners have them shot made. And the bottom line is you're looking for a way to re-grip that blank so that you can not turn it, but you can mount it in a different direction. So I believe what they do generally is get it between centers or a chuck in a live center and turn it and create the best sphere you can. And then you've got a shot-made mounting device where, like, a little cup is in your chuck, another cup is up against your live center, and you're going to squeeze your freshly made sphere in between the two, but now it's mounted the other way. So what was the headstock and tailstock mounts are now facing you, but cut off the excess first, and then you shape that. And if you create a template, like a little half-round template, before you start, you can put that on the sphere, do a little shaping, reposition it, put it on the sphere. So the benefit to this cup-to-cup thing is you can keep readjusting, relocating the sphere between those two half cups into a bunch of different positions to get it as true as you possibly can. And whether there's, I know there are commercially made sphere cutters. A guy that I know turns really cool epoxy stuff on his lathe. On Instagram, it's Scott's Mini Woodshop is his channel. And he's got a tool mounted on a pivot point that allows him to swing across that blank to create a perfect sphere. I don't know what the name of it is, but if you look up Scott's Mini Woodshop on the Instagram, you can probably ask him on there what he's using. Jay says, I've heard people say they skip plane boards to get them flat. What is skip planing? I thought a jointer makes boards flat, not a planer. So, there's a bunch of stuff here. Skip planing, I'd probably also call that hit or miss. And I get that done sometimes where the lumber is sitting in a lumberyard, my hardwood supplier, rough saw. And I want to get it here as thick as possible, but in its rough sawn 4/4 state, maybe some of it is 4/4, some of it is 1 1/16, maybe it goes up to 1 1/8. And if I bring that here, it's kind of a pain because it's so irregular in thickness. Hit or miss means, like I would say, hit or miss to 15/16. And what that means is they're going to send it through, and when I receive it, it's quite possible that there are parts of it that are still rough, parts of it that are smooth from the plane. Now you're right, a jointer makes stuff flat, but on a big scale of 500 board feet of material that's coming to me, you're not going to face joint every one of those boards to get one flat face before it goes to the plane. So skip planing or hit or miss would get it pretty uniform. When I get it in my shop and I'm going to actually start using it for a project, then I'm going to face joint it, then go to my planer and bring it down to its uniform final thickness of 3/4 or whatever I'm looking for. That's different than if I tell my provider S2S 13/16 from 4/4 to 13/16, I don't think anything is going to come to me with any rough sawn left on it. It's going to be smooth two faces. Will it be perfectly flat? Maybe, maybe not, because with planers, kind of like you're pointing out here, planers can simply follow a twist in a board and leave that twist in there when it comes out. So the answer of starting with the jointer is 100% right, but you can get stuff pretty flat sending it through a plane. But anyway, skip or hit or miss is you're not getting perfectly smooth faces when you're done. And I've seen this done a lot too with flooring, skip plane flooring. is when it's all done, you'll still see the machine marks. You'll see a little bit of roughs on it. It's a very rustic look. Jim says, I'm planning on making a tabletop. Will I run into issues such as expansion, mixing face grain and edge grain boards? Well, probably yes, depending on how you execute this. So here's our piece of poplar. Wood expands and contracts across the grain. It expands negligibly this way. So if I take a piece, see if I can make another waterfall of wood fall out of there. Beautiful piece of curly maple. The grain on this maple is this way. The grain on the poplar is also vertical. If I take this maple and I put the poplar on like this, because I want to see the end grain. Now, one, you don't want to mix species because the expansion is different between maple and poplar. If I have a second piece of maple and I want to put it on like this to see that end grain, you're going to be fine because this is still moving across the width, moving across the width. If you do something like this, you're going to get in trouble because this wants to move across the width in this direction. This is not going to move in this direction. So generally, this piece, if you glue these rigidly together, is going to crack. So you have to just watch the orientation. You've got to keep the width of the piece in the same plane, the same direction all the time so they can move together. David says, I'm starting to build some 7'6" high mirrored bifold doors. The glass size in each panel is 10 inches wide, 6'2" long. What thickness of mirror glass would you recommend? No say. So here where I live, Indian Head Glass is a chain, and I have gone to them 11 billion times with my projects. And so I'll tell you the best one. Back in the day, I traded a curio cabinet for a horse, an Arabian horse. I think they got the better deal out of the curio cabinet than I got out of the Arabian horse. The people who got the curio cabinet wanted to store snow globes in it. So I went to Indian Head Glass and said, here's what I'm looking to do. The cabinet is going to be X inches wide. We're going to put so many snow globes on each shelf. So what's coming out of that is the shelf is spanning this much distance. Does it need to be tempered glass? Safety glass? What do you do to the front edge? You can treat that front edge so it's not rough. So they're the experts and they know. And all I had was, if I spec this, the vision in my head was, I don't know, there were 6 or 8 shelves in this 6-foot tall cabinet. If the top one broke and that went, and I not only broke all the shelves, but I shattered, my malfeasance shattered 50 snow globes, that would be a really bad day. So this is something this is take it to the experts kind of thing. Find a glass company and I don't know if Indian Head is national or only regional, but they've done a lot of work for me and always done a great job. So I would definitely take this to the experts. So back to the strips question, I want to clarify, I don't have the flake off issue when routing. It happens over time after exposure to hot water. The item I am referring to is a brewing paddle. Oh, that's exposed to acidic, hot, aqueous environment. Is it that the glue is just deteriorating over time? Oh, so maybe, yeah. So something like Type Bond 3, the glue, Type Bond 3, the test it has to pass is ANSI something. Basically, the passing of that test is exposure to high heat and high humidity. the acidic part of your equation. I'm not sure. But you could, I don't know what to say on the bottle, and then you can research it. Oh, so it says on here, if you want to look this up, it passes ANSI is ANSI, type 1 water resistance. So if you look that up, what is type 1 water resistance from ANSI? That'll tell you what temperature that got taken to pass that test, and it's also food safe. So yes, it could be that changing glues will then give you a better result. Cool. Well, this was good. So one, I want to thank everybody for coming back this week. And then a question for the audience. Is anybody watching who's going to be at Mark Adams next week? I'm teaching cabinet making at the Mark Adams School outside of Indianapolis, a week-long class next week. If you're not familiar with the school, you should look it up. Just Google Mark, M-A-R-C, Mark Adams School of Woodworking. Amazing facility, 60,000 square feet. The shop I'm teaching in is set up with, 4 table saws, 4 joiners, 6 planers. It's huge. Plus a classroom environment, classroom workbench environment. While I'm teaching cabinet making, another teacher is teaching upholstery, somebody else is teaching inlay, somebody else will be teaching finishing, somebody else teaching lathe turning. So he's got all these different classrooms set up, and he does all sorts of funky stuff, blacksmithing, making chocolate, painting. It's a very cool spot. So if you're not familiar and you're looking to take your education to another level, the Mark Adams School is a great spot. Roger asks, what's the best method to bring the finish back to a dull finish, poly, on a dining table? Use fine grit sandpaper or maybe some type of wax, or, so interesting question. So polyurethane is basically plastic. An epoxy, like a car finish, you can buff it. And you can get it to a point where you can see your face in it. If the poly is old, I'm not sure. So you say it's dull, you don't say it's old. But if it's an older finish, I'm not sure there's enough finish left there to allow you to buff it out. I mean, probably the 100% right answer is top coat it with a new finish. Wax would probably do it. The problem with wax, especially on a dining table, wax takes a lot of maintenance. You can put it on, let it dry, buff it out, get a nice sheen to it. But in an area where it's going to see a lot of activity, like a dining room table, that's something you're going to do pretty frequently. Your best bet would really be to scuff sand it, and then get a new layer of finish over the top of it. You could try in an inconspicuous area, don't sand it, go straight to like a little bit of buffing. So a real low-tech way to do this would be a rubbing compound that you would use on a car, turtle wax rubbing compound. So try this like on a leg or a rail of the table, and put a little bit on a rag. I think the rag typically has to be damp, and then rub that on, buff it by hand, and see if you get a good result out of that. And if you do, it's possible you could power buff, just like you would on a car, the whole top. I would be prepared with that for the concept of it didn't quite work the way you wanted, and maybe you still have to refinish it. This would probably be a good question if you Google furniture refinishers in your area and ask somebody. This is an area I've done hardly any refinishing. This would be a great question for somebody who knows way more about refinishing wood products than I do. All right, well, we're about there. Regarding the paddle boards, let's see. We're going to do this again in a month. They will still be here. Next step is I got to get the rest of the strips on this guy. This guy gets flipped over, and I got to put all the strips on the top. Then they get wooden rails around the outside. That's a bent lamination. So multiple layers of 1/4-inch material will make up the rails out here. And then a nose made out of hardwood. I'm making that out of lace wood. It's going to be really pretty under fiberglass. A nose and a tail. So, and then fiberglass everything. So I will, when we're back in a month, I'll show you where I'm at. Other than that, thanks for the patience coming off of last week. And thanks for tuning in again this week. Thanks to Type On for sponsoring, and Kate